the symposium here. And yeah, Mike, let's make sure we start the recording. This will be recorded for posterity. And we'll, of course, be making all of the materials available after the sessions are presented here. And as I've said before, the materials are available. There's a link in the chat. If you haven't yet, by all means, feel free to go ahead and download the book, the program, and there are plenty of other resources. We've created a little separate resource library within the NAA group, which is available at the hub. For those of you who are familiar with it, it's there, just go into the NAA group. If you're not, just go ahead and sign up and you can get access to all the materials and some other specific things that we'll be referencing along the way here. Like most Zooms lately, we'll be trying to use chat to engage conversation, thoughts, ideas. So feel free to do that. We'll be monitoring that. And also, I really love when people use their little emojis on their that the Zoom has afforded us in terms of your support and interest in the material here. If by some chance we run into a problem with Zoom, of course, please try to reboot in. If there's some other major thing, we'll all sort of just reboot again, but I don't expect that to happen, but stuff occasionally does happen. We have plenty of backup, so we should be in good shape. And so with that, I'm Daniel Stun. I'm the president and one of the co-founders of Stewards Change Institute. And I am delighted to start up the first day of our virtual event. I must say that I am deeply, deeply disappointed that we are not now standing in Palo Alto on the beautiful campus at Stanford, where we had intended and planned to hold this symposium. So we'll have to make do with the virtual Furry Slipper Club and allow everybody to watch from home. We do plan on, at some point when things get back together again, we do plan on trying to actually have an in-person meeting, as I said, sometime in the not too distant future. But since things are uncertain right now, we have to take it by ear. So I'm going to spend a little time the first hour here or so. We're going to do a little introduction, where we are, where we came from, where we're headed, some of the key learning. I'll do a little bit of that introduction along with Dr. Karen Smith and David Reckoff. And then we'll sort of segue into a conversation around equity and with Uma and Chris Gibbons as we move forward here. And so again, I want to thank everybody for making time today to participate in this. There are many people on the call who have been participating in the National Action Agenda for the last 6, 7, 8 months or so, but there are also a number of other people who are new to the party here. So we'll be keeping that in mind as we move through the agenda here and share information. There may be questions. Feel free to ask questions and offer your suggestions as well. And so when we get started, that should be obvious. So the name of our symposium couldn't get much longer. The National Action Agenda Symposium to Advance Upstream Social Determinants and Health Equity. We wanted to get everything into that, and I think we've been successful at accomplishing that to a certain degree. We're going to talk about the various aspects of that as part of the intro. So I'm going to talk about the action agenda. Karen Smith is going to talk a little bit about social determinants as part of her introduction, and Dave Reckoff, our esteemed Stanford partner, will also just do a quick introduction and talk a little bit about some of the work on health equity. So with that, I first of all want to deeply thank our sponsors and supporters who have made this possible. I think it's obvious that these are incredibly tough times for the philanthropic community, for the public sector, and for the nonprofit sector. But our sponsors came forward and have provided resources for us to be able to do the work here. So I want to call out and thank the Mental Health Services Oversight and Accountability Commission, Michigan Health Information Network and Interoperability Institute for this. Also our sponsors, including Health Choice Arizona, MITRE Corporation, FEI Systems, Bright Hive, and Data Across Sectors for Health. And of course, I want to thank the Kresge Foundation for supporting our work over the last number of years to build out the National Interoperability Collaborative from which this work stems. So thank you all greatly for your contribution and support, and I look forward to continuing support as we go into the 2021. Importantly, this work is really the output from a lot of people, well over 100 people who have been participating for the last 6 months. And I hope we've got everybody listed, all your organizations on the back of the program. We really wanted to acknowledge participation here, and it was astounding, and it was incredibly gratifying to have people participate, both from our sponsors, our partners, our Project Unify team, who you'll be hearing about from later, the Institute staff, and of course, members of our board of directors. So really a giant thank you to all of, to everybody who has committed to supporting this process. And it's been an opportunity for us to learn Zoom together. We've had plenty of meetings, long meetings over the months, and learning how to do this work together has been exciting and also gratifying. So today, if you just imagine a year ago trying to do this work, and imagining we got 100 some odd people on a call doing a virtual conference, it's pretty astounding in my mind that we've adapted so quickly, and of course the challenges ahead of us for really taking full advantage of the technology and all the benefits it can afford us in many ways. So I want to start, as I have in the past, with this this famous, probably overly used quote now from Wayne Gretzky, and the idea of skating to where the puck is headed, as opposed to where it has been or where it is. It's an obvious statement in terms of hockey, and I think it has obvious application and applicability to the work we're doing. When we started this work, actually started thinking about this in January of last year, we were intent on producing our 14th national symposium in order to just continue in our traditional line of bringing people together, thought leaders. And we were starting to march down that road when pretty quickly, as soon as COVID hit, we realized we needed to really change direction and think differently about where we were going. And certainly as soon as, and we all have our experiences of that really dawning on us, the exponential growth of a global virus and what the impact of that was, we didn't really know. And I still, unfortunately, don't think we know, although we'll be exploring a bit of that today, I'm sure, as well. The future was unclear, but we decided to move forward anyway. As opposed to be paralyzed by it, we decided that we would rally the partnerships and the collaborators and the folks who have expressed interest over the years, both through the National Interoperability Collaborative and partners along the way, to see what we could do and see how we could contribute to what might be some solutions down the road, not knowing where the future was headed. And so we proposed an agile approach to say, let's work together, let's try to understand what the needs are and what we could possibly do to change the trajectory of the safety net system of our country, given all of the challenges that we were facing and obviously continue to face. The future was unclear, and January 21 seemed like a lifetime away. Well, it's here. 9 months is here. And unlike the Field of Dreams, we've actually been building this together. So a lot of the material and work you'll see here, as I said, is the output from many people who have contributed time and energy to that. And so what we have to bring to you today is some of that best thinking and recommendations and ideas, and I think a sense of the excitement of where we are headed, or the possibilities of where we'll be headed. Just for a recap, just remind everybody, and folks who are new to this call here, what and why did we organize the NNA? What do we want to accomplish? Our overall goal was to improve health, safety, well-being, equity, and social justice, especially for underserved and under-resourced populations, and with a particular focus on children and kids. That is becoming more and more obvious, the need to really connect our services and to get smart about how do we do that. An objective under that was to increase prevention, early detection, and intervention by eliminating system-level barriers to information sharing and cross-domain programs. So embedded in this work is this idea of information sharing and the opportunity to share in a responsible, secure manner information that is critical to decision-making, critical to understanding not only who we're serving and how we're serving them, but the makeup and the composition. And as we'll see in a little bit, under the president's new executive order that was issued on the first day of his administration, equity has become a key critical issue and opportunity. And within that, there's actually specific language around improving information sharing in order to understand who we're serving and how we're serving them and how we're not serving them, importantly. Our strategy was and is to identify and begin implementing a few key actionable recommendations to demonstrate system-level change and cross-domain information sharing. The operative words here are a few. We wanted to identify some things we could actually go do. And there are certainly wonderful, insightful, brilliant reports out and a lot of recommendations, all of which are valuable and useful. So we wanted to look at those and understand those, but also understand how we could actually go do. And that's a lot of the focus for the work that we've been doing here, is to identify those. And I'm going to share some of that with you. Our journey, without getting into the gory details of it, really formally started sort of in July and August, as we formed our relationship and collaboration with Stanford Center for Population Health Sciences and Karen Smith and PG Forrest, who have been just amazing partners along the way here. And we introduced ideas, scenarios, a proof of concept. We began to work on identifying problems and action recommendations, and then really refine those in November, December. And what we're showing you today is sort of not a final form of those recommendations, but I think a consensus view of a lot of what we learned at a summary level. There's plenty of details to go into, but importantly, where we're going to head next and how we're going to address the challenges that we've identified. And all of this has been documented. So there's a lot of material that has been created. We hope to share some of it with you today. As I said, the main thing was to identify some action recommendations, and we very specifically chose this term, action recommendations, so as to think about what could be actually implemented and changed. And these recommendations are really, we believe, should be crucial to enabling cross-domain information sharing, which supports prevention, early detection, and intervention, and other upstream, as referred to, upstream efforts. We know that that's important. We know that the return on prevention is enormous, hard to quantify, but crucially important. All the more important as we think about the world that we're living in now and the challenges that so many families, so many new families to our systems and needing services from our service systems are needing to access. What we have come up with are 6 broad action recommendations that the group really worked on over the months, looking at the problems, looking at social determinants, really analyzing, going through a whole variety of exercises along the way. And these, as you can see, have to do with data sharing and cross-domain governance, housing as healthcare, access to civil justice, care coordination, and involving people with lived experience. These really emerged. These are, in some ways, are the critical components of interoperability and information sharing. At least that's the distillation of the thinking of the groups that were participating in this exercise. And so, without going into great detail, although there is tremendous detail that's available also through the chat, on the site, that goes into actually how we got to this stuff. So data sharing, just very briefly, is really demonstrating and documenting that data sharing can occur across diverse services and sectors. How is it that we're actually sharing information? The whole concept of housing as healthcare really emerged, at least for me and many people in this group, as a critical component of the work we're doing and how it is that we're thinking about other services and supports that are able to really support wellness and well-being. Civil justice, this is some work that we're doing in collaboration also with Q Charitable Trust. They'll really look at increasing access to the civil justice system. And as you'll hear later, for those of you who participate in that particular group, we'll hear from folks about that in greater detail. In fact, the conversation has been a lot around civil justice as a social determinant. Not having access or not knowing one has access to the civil justice system is a problem. Care coordination, critically important, and at its core requires really data sharing. Governance is always a topic that comes up. It's particularly challenging across domains when there are multiple agencies or programs or processes involved. And the idea of cross-domain governance is hugely important. And that's actually one of the things that has emerged as one of the possible areas for system level change. And then of course, people with lived experience. We need to incorporate people with the experience of living and working in those situations through all levels. So at a high level, these are the 6 action domains. These are system level action domains. And that what we've done, without getting into detail here, this is just a slide of the assessment criteria that we went through in some excruciating detail. What I want to do is I want to share with you that we actually were successful in many ways. We identified, in addition to the 6 domains, 1 system level action recommendation and several priorities that we think we can actually begin to work on. And one of the exciting ones here is this cross-domain governance. And if it's possible to really address the issues of consent through some kind of national utility, so that every jurisdiction, every community doesn't have to build the infrastructure and the tools from the start. And so there's a work group that's starting on this, and actually one of the breakout groups is focused on this as well. So it is very exciting to think about having federal, state, local participation really grapple with some work that has been done historically through SAMHSA, and now at the Administration for Children and Families. On the tactical implementation side, and these are really tied to the breakouts in many ways, we wanted to identify things that we could actually go do or support or at least point at that would be possible to do starting in 2021. And as you'll hear in a bit more from Dr. McCoy about the Integrated Care for Kids site and the work that's progressing there, these things are all possible to be implemented in terms of helping New Jersey and helping the Inc. site build out their interoperability solutions. So as you can see, we want to help build a blueprint for interoperability. We want to actually technically connect housing and health, increase connections between social care and other programs, and with civil justice, civil courts, support the care coordination with enhanced data sharing, and support authorized governance models with cross-domain data sharing. So as to how do you actually implement that? And then finally, we want to make sure that we're paying attention to and supporting people with lived experience. So that's the good news. It was a lot of work. This is a starting point. By no means is this where we expect to end up, but it's a place that's tangible, that has meaningful opportunity to make potentially some structural change, and also to demonstrate the possibility of sharing data across different disciplines and domains that are not used to doing that work. I want to just make a note, and we'll come back to this later in the day here. You'll notice in the program, we've written a letter, Dave Ross from the Public Health Informatics Institute and the Gates Global Task Force on Health. We decided to focus in on this work and making children a focus of this interoperability work. And this has just been published on Medium. And as you'll read in the program, it's a focus of taking all this interoperability work, which is important and critical to everyone in the country, but to actually emphasize the importance for children and how we have the means and the capabilities and the tools to actually make significant progress. And this, of course, is perfectly in alignment with the new administration and their interests and their efforts to actually make kids a priority through the implementation of new tax credits and other resources and assets for children. And that's really an exciting thing. And we really want to sort of focus on that. And as I said, later in the day, we'll come back to the conversation around making system change, but from a children's priority perspective. As I think about how to do this work, one of the things that struck me over not only this year, but previously, is that there are many other organizations involved in related and aligned work. And there's just a few here that I've noted, and they've all been part of this work in some way, shape, or form. What's exciting is this idea of building a community of networks. The idea that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts is crucial and critical to our success. I don't think we'll be able to do it alone, but by joining arms and by working together to understand our individual capabilities and collectively what we can provide, and ideally looking forward to being able to relate and link our services and our programs, we may have a chance, a better chance, of actually making the kind of progress we'll hear and we hope to be able to address going into the future. And again, we'll be having a conversation tomorrow afternoon with many of the participants in these foundations and other organizations to really look at how do we actually connect and create a larger community of networks. When we started the NIC, we talked about it as a community of networks, and I'm really delighted to say that I think we're making progress in that area. So stay tuned there, and thank all of you for participating in the work that we've done. All right, I'm just going to finish up with 2 slides before I turn it over here. One is the flow of the sessions today. You probably saw from the agenda of the program. We're in this welcome and overview session. We'll move next to a 45-minute session where we'll be talking about how to implement the National Action Agenda and the Integrated Care for Kids we're calling Shovel Ready. And Dr. McCoy and Brian Hansbicker will help us with that. We take a little break, 15-minute break, and then we jump into 3 breakouts. And those breakouts are a deeper dive, let's get technical as we call it, about the unified proof of concept. And that is actually the mechanism by which we're actually developing the interoperability work in New Jersey. And we hope that will be broadly accessible and useful. We'll be focusing on another breakout on increasing access to justice. And this is partly the work we're doing with Pew Charitable Trust. And then finally, we'll be diving more deeply into social determinants and what I refer to as the 201 or the 301 level course. All of these are meant to go deeper and to really explore some of the topics in some greater detail. And then we'll close out the day from 3 to 4 with driving system level change. It's a panel, but it will really be a fishbowl conversation. Tomorrow, we have a similar format, just so you're aware of it, because we wanted to make sure we offered a number of breakouts to accommodate people's different interests and also cover many of the areas that are outlined in the action agenda. And so tomorrow morning, we'll open it up and we'll have a plenary discussion with Shrendra Paul from the VA and our colleagues, Suzanne Tamang and others from Stanford, really looking at data interoperability at scale and what the implications are that for suicide prevention and health equity and a number of other things. It's a great privilege to invite Shrendra to participate in our work. We've known him over the years. Some of you may have known him from our other events, but looking forward to really thinking about scalable change. And then we'll have 3 simultaneous breakouts. As I said, managing consent as utility, housing as healthcare, and then an international panel. How are they folks from the European Social Network, which is a national association or an EU and OECD association, and some specific examples from Finland. And then we'll finish out the day with a conversation around how do we really leverage the power of collaboration. And with that, what I would like to do is share, actually ask Karen and then David to just say a few words of welcome. And so Karen, the mic is over to you.
Yeah, so thank you, Daniel. Thank you everybody for being here. This is really exciting. I want to take a second to recognize the incredible effort. I know Daniel already has, but it's really worth stressing how much work went into the effort that's unfolded over this past year to bring us to a place where we actually have some very concrete recommendations, and we're poised to actually start thinking about realistic ways to implement those recommendations. Well over 100 people from across health and human services spectrum and other critical sectors such as justice, they've devoted countless number of hours over the months to work groups and other meetings, and having really deep conversations, deep and difficult conversations about how we can collectively take action to address those most important social and socioeconomic factors and issues that really determine whether or not individuals, families, and communities are going to be healthy and thrive. These were conversations that in the beginning went kind of like, well, what do we do about income? And how far back do we go in our root cause analysis before we start talking about where to take action? And I'm just so impressed by both the commitment, but also the brain power and people's willingness to really push back in an incredibly collaborative way on each other, as well as coming together then to deeply dive into the why and the how, not just the what, of what we should be prioritizing in what is an incredibly complex body of work to really improve health through upstream action. That we've come this far, despite the fact that this has been an unprecedented, challenging year with the pandemic. And the vast majority of everyone who has been working so hard on this effort had to take time out of their full-time jobs, all working on in areas that have been very profoundly impacted, both their work, but also the people that they serve because of the pandemic. So this is just a huge thank you to all of you. It's really exciting to see these recommendations come into reality, but then also to begin, which is what I see this symposium as the beginning of the next step in getting from the recommendations to a sort of implementation agenda, if you will. So this symposium is really a milestone, but the overall journey will continue. So thank you, Daniel. I'll pass the podium, if you will, off to David.
Thank you, Karen. No, I mean, when we started this process, I mean, almost a year ago with Daniel on Stewards of Change, it was hard to know exactly where it was going to lead. And, you know, as Karen said, with all the demands people have on their time right now, you know, whether people would be able to take the time and do this. So it's been so exciting for me to see all of the work that people have been doing and the progress that we've made before. So whether you're working with us for the past 6 months or whether you're joining for the first time here, welcome, and so great to have you here for this 2 days of work. My name is David Rakoff. I'm the co-director of the Stanford Center for Population Health Sciences. I'm a social epidemiologist. And what our center does is we focus on applying research to improve population health and reduce social inequalities in health. And so, you know, the reason we're so excited to collaborate and work with Stewards of Change here is because of as researchers, we've seen a lot of work. We've seen really compelling work on social determinants of health. And we really want to see that put into action. And we want to go through this struggle with people on the ground, people doing work, and us on the research side, and think about how these two kind of paths can come together more closely. So, you know, that's why it's just been so exciting for me personally to see this process, be part of this process. And we're so grateful to Daniel and Stewards of Change and, you know, all of their experience in convening these type of groups in the past and seeing the kind of successes that we could build on to really move forward to take action on social determinants of health. So I want to just very briefly here in 1 or 2 minutes talk about, kind of getting back to Daniel's point about this really long title that's inclusive of a lot of things, and focus here on upstream social determinants of health, and sort of as a researcher, how I think about what that means. So, upstream, you can use a few different phrases for that. I mean, I like sort of the causes of the causes phrase that people have talked about. So if you think about sort of the common causes of illness that people think about, whether it's, mental health or sort of physical activity or diet, what are the causes of those type of what are typically seen as the causes? And so upstream means thinking about some of those. Fundamental causes is another phrase people have used. So, and research has really worked out, over the last really several centuries, beginning with when data has been collected, the sort of logic of that particular approach. And so that's why the interest and focus here on upstream. So then next word, social. So we include in that thinking about social relations, social organization, social structures. So that's a lot. That could mean a lot of things. That's very inclusive, which is intentional. But I think what it isn't, is the underlying biology of people out of context, and not about individualized health behaviors out of the context of lived experience or life course experience. It does, I think, to me and most others, and the way we're thinking about it, include social relations and social structures within healthcare and within service delivery systems. I think one thing to point out from research, as broad as this is, Dr. Krieger at Harvard School of Public Health has done some quantitative work on this to show 95% of research and publications are about those individualized biology out of context, about individualized health behaviors. And so it's not that those aren't important or that that kind of research isn't also important. It's just seems to be, based on the value of social relations, social structures, a little out of balance. And so that's why I think I'm here as a researcher. We're here to kind of bring the emphasis back to some of these areas that are so important and so, neglected overall within our healthcare and health delivery system. So the final word, determinants, is one that can be, sometimes I've heard is problematic to some folks. So I just wanted to unpack that a little bit. I think it's really, really important to think about determinants in a probabilistic way, in a context-specific way, and that it doesn't mean that it's inevitable. And so determinant means something that's a very strong influence, but not something that's inevitable. So we don't think about these sort of social determinants and the way they affect health as mean that people are doomed because they're living in a certain situation or within a certain social structure. And we're actually really hopeful that what we can do and the actions we can take can change those relations that we see now. And I think when you look globally, you look at different periods of time, you can see these examples of places that just do not have the same levels of social inequalities in health as we see in the United States. And you see that variable over time, variable over a place. I do work in Costa Rica. I'll talk about this in the breakout session a little bit. But there, even though you see high levels of inequality, high levels of poverty, they have really, really low, almost non-existent social inequalities in health. So they've been able to invest in public health infrastructure. They've had particular programs, local health clinics, home visits, a lot of really interesting things about that context. So even though we talk about determinants and talk about the power of social structures and social relations, it doesn't mean they're inevitable. And our goal is to interrupt those processes. So thank you again for joining us. From my perspective as a researcher and those of us on the research side that are joining today, we're really excited to learn how we can be useful, how we can come together with people that are on the ground taking action. And that's really my goal. So thank you for all your work so far. And I really look forward to the next 2 days.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Karen. Really appreciate the partnership and the support as we've been working on this stuff for the last 6-8 months or so. So I'm looking forward to it, the sessions today and then going into the future. Thank you for your remarks. What I'd like to do next is invite Uma Alawalia and Chris Gibbons, who are been on this journey with us for a while, and talk a little bit about health equity and racial justice. It has become forefront in our efforts in our minds, and I think it's an important way to start the work we're talking about here. So let me turn it over and engage in a little conversation around this. Uma?
Great. Hi, everyone. It is really such a joy to be here in this company because we've been journeying for quite a while on both integration and interoperability across health and human services and thinking about it in the context of equity. So 2020 in many ways was another watershed moment to lift up this discussion, not just about social determinants, but about equity. And when we were prepping for this session, we thought it would be good to start us off with the definition because it means different things to different people. And so we did want to start with this sort of discussion about what is health equity, and the CDC definition says it's achieved when every person has the opportunity to attain his or her full health potential, and no one is disadvantaged from achieving this potential because of social position or other socially determined circumstances. And health inequities are reflected in differences in length of life, quality of life, rates of disease, disability, and death, severity of disease, and access to treatment. But, you know, in many ways, the conversation right now is beyond just around health equity, right? It's about race equity. There's a conversation that's going on about disability rights or gender or sex or ethnicity, just all kinds of places where there is this conversation around equity. I'll tell you the one fear I have, and I know there are some questions that we have to walk through, but the one fear I have is that this will become a pro pharma term. And everybody will claim that they're about equity, but then no, people aren't actually willing to do the deep work that's involved in both confronting the inequities that exist, both in society at large, but in our own workplaces and in the work that we're doing with the folks who we want to impact. And so how do we make this conversation authentic? How do we make our work authentic is one of those questions that to me feels very real. Daniel, can we go to the next slide?
I'm muted.
So the question of sort of racial justice, and we pulled that definition from the Annie Casey Foundation. Racial justice is the systematic fair treatment of people of all races that results in equitable opportunities.
Uma, you just muted.
Sorry, I've been talking to myself. I apologize.
Just the last 2 seconds.
So all people are able to achieve their full potential. So I'm not going to read. You see this, and this framework of how do you tie health equity and race equity and social justice into our work, I think is the challenge for us going forward. If we go to the next slide, there is actually, well, there's the presidential order that Daniel referenced earlier. And we're going to start to see more of this emerge in RFPs at federal and state levels. And as many of us respond to the policy and the delivery system side of our work, we have to appreciate it's not just a value, it's not just enough to say we're about race equity, but to fold it every day into the work products that we deliver, into the work that we do, and in the way that we're engaging with people throughout those delivery systems in ways that actually start to address those inequalities and address those disparities in outcomes. And so, you know, there are these questions that we've pushed forward. So the first, I think, and then so you see these questions, and before we get to them, I'm going to pass the baton to Chris so he can weigh in before we as a group start to reflect on what are these questions and how do we want to, as a collective group, as thought leaders, respond to them. Chris?
Thanks, Uma. Let me first say that we're hoping that this session that we do is interactive. It's not a didactic or a teaching session. We'd like you guys to respond as well, put thoughts in the chat. I believe Dan will allow you to speak if you want to speak. But as an interactive session, so we're laying out and we have these questions here to grapple with, but hopefully it's not just you, Uma and I speaking. I agree with everything Uma has said, and I am a full, believer in that these issues are critical elements that we must solve going forward. And we have actually, I think, a tremendous opportunity to do that, even as things are bad. But one of the challenges that I've had is that, or one of the fears, Uma talked about her fear, one of the fears that I have is that this work will remain descriptive and not ever make a difference. And we've seen a lot of that up until now. It's one of the reasons I'm interested in participating in what Dan is doing, because it's all about action and results. But much of the research out there, much of the work has been descriptive in one form or another, and far, 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 far less on what can be done and will it work. And part of that, I think, is because some of this is still nebulous in our minds. If we could do one thing, I just want to illustrate. If you go back to the definition, the CDC definition, Dan, for us right quick, I just want to highlight one thing. Yes. So if we're talking about health equity, it says here, health equity is achieved when every person has the opportunity to, quote, attain his or her full health potential. Sounds great. When that happens, does that mean everybody will attain their full health potential? I think that's what we would like. That's what we all want, but that's not what this says to me. It says everybody has the opportunity to do it. And if that's where we are, and I'm not saying we shouldn't be, we have to recognize that for any variety of reasons, people may or may not choose to exercise that opportunity. But this is an area I think we can tighten up a bit. Even more than we have already done. This is progress over where we were, but in my view, I think we can tighten it up even more, and that's part of what we're doing here. So with that, I'll give it back to Uma and hopefully hear your thoughts. You may agree or disagree with me. I think that's what this is all about, trying to come together and advance us all in this field forward. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Chris. So people should use the chat box. There are a couple of comments that are already starting to emerge. I think the commitment to kick off these 2 days with the discussion of equity sort of underlies the emphasis that we all want to place on this topic, right? And to make sure that every discussion that we have, that this value emerges in those conversations. And so start with the first question. And I know that there is a question in there that Shumendra has put in. Do we have an understanding of best practices or state of the art with metrics and measures and underlying data requirements? And I just want to clarify, is that related to equity? And if you can just chat in there, and then we can put that as a question too for folks to weigh in on, right? What measures and metrics make the most sense? Our hope is that we will walk away from these 2 days with not just an action agenda, but some ideas, right? Some pathways on how to embed this work, this equity value principle, and how to operationalize it into the work that we all are doing. And BJ says opportunity ought to have a definable floor so that we do not blame people when we think they're not taking advantage of so-called opportunity. Absolutely. I think that's a very deep and meaningful comment. And
Uma, can I
yeah, please do.
I absolutely agree with that. And I, again, don't get me wrong, I'm a full believer, but people have choices and they have to balance things. And are we saying that we don't believe anybody would not choose what we want them to choose? I mean, I just think we have to acknowledge that there may be people for their own reasons that may not see it the way we see it, and therefore may not choose what we feel they ought to choose by our definitions. I'm not advocating that somebody doesn't have their full potential, but I think we don't serve ourselves well if we assume everybody is going to see it the way we see it, and everybody will believe that what we believe is the best. We have to create a framework that is broad enough for those who might not, but yet still somehow be able to achieve the goals that we think are best for everybody.
That's critical. I remember this one blog I read of a woman who spent her earned income tax credit, right, on buying herself a pair of fancy sneakers.
Right.
And she said, I'm so tired of not feeling good about myself. And this made me feel good about myself.
Right.
And somebody else, was sort of, I'm being judged for making that choice. But, and I think sometimes we do need to pay attention to those. What are those opportunities? How are we defining them? And if for that woman, or if she bought it for her child, and for that child, his self-esteem when going to school was important, we have to be sensitive about judging those kinds of decisions. I couldn't,
Exactly.
I'm simplifying it a little bit, but
you're hitting it right on.
Lots of comments popping in. I'm not going to read them all, but please pay attention to those. I think they are really, really invaluable. And I absolutely share the anxiety that this will be the flavor of the month. And because doing the work of equity is very hard work. You've got to confront many, you got to confront values that are deeply ingrained, and you got to create a workplace where it's permissible, right? Like to question and to move forward. And that's the safety that has to be created. Not always easy to do.
Mm-hmm.
Question to the group, right? Particularly about the discussion item, the first one. The White House has issued an executive order on advancing equity. Great. The real task is going to be in communities, right? Where we all live, work, play, engage. And so what would that look like? What would that look like? And I would tie the first and the third question over there, because we want to embed it in action recommendations. We've already said, here are the things that we as a community believe are important. Mm-hmm. So if we were to take that executive order and then embed it, what would that look like? And so Mary says, one of the elements is having OMB take a leadership role in gathering the data nationally, identifying places where ability to examine equity is lacking, and linking it to budget is important. So it's one of the harder things. So I'll just share my experience, and I'd love to hear from other people. When I was in county government and we had to make budget cuts, we said, oh, if we only knew, right, where those impacts were going to be the hardest, that you could be that you're cutting dentures for a small group of seniors who couldn't afford it, right? That's only impacting 30 people versus cutting behavioral health services that impacts 2,000 people, for example.
Yeah.
And how do you place that value, and who's impacted, and who gets the service, and who do you take it away from? And what's that algorithm is where I agree, the lived experience becomes really important. But I'm just throwing that out. What does budget, how do you build those those algorithms into a budget building process where it stays equitable.
Uma, I can add one thing to that as well. Just this morning, before getting on this, I got an email from somebody, a news report coming out. I'm in the Washington, D.C., Maryland area, and the headline is "Red Flags Being Raised About the Race Disparity in Maryland's Early Coronavirus Vaccine Rollout Data." And so I quickly skimmed it, of course, because that's a concern we all know. And the article acknowledges that African Americans in Maryland have been hit hardest. And it says only about 16% of the first doses of the vaccine have been given to African Americans. 4.6 have gone to Latinos. And these groups make up about 30% and 10% equally. So you could easily say, well, that's a disparity there, that's a problem. And then they talk about the sort of the number of deaths from coronavirus, where Blacks have about 35%, Latinos about 20%, and whites have about 50%. So the question is sort of which ones of those, so if you look at the deaths and where the vaccines are going, it doesn't look to be as disparate as if you look at the racial populations. And so the question becomes, which data do we actually use to decide what's a disparity or what's not, you know?
Right, lots of rich conversation popping up in the text messaging as you're talking, Chris, and I'm looking at it. And I have one comment that particularly resonates, right, is this question of initiative versus embedding it into all the work that we do. And we do tend to be initiative focused or pilot focused, and then the pilot ends or the grant ends and the flavor ends, and let's start over again. I have noticed though, and you have all too, a lot of the grant making from foundations really asks for equity to be embedded as sort of an offering, and how you're going to address it and what does that look like. And I think we're going to see more of this. You know, lots, and Charlie has lots of good feedback on, you know, equity and racism, how to have productive hands-on activities for practitioners, how to engage in these conversations. And then Richard says, there's a great resource for a detailed description of equity-oriented community efforts for the future that can be found together in Thriving Together, a Springboard for Equity Recovery. Do you want to put a link for that, Richard, in the text box so everybody can easily access that?
And then we can also post it on the hub as well.
So I know that we're barely skimming the surface, and Daniel tells me we have a few minutes left before you have to move to your next agenda item to stay on time. I see Suzanne has a visual that says she's happy to be a health equity Avenger, and I'd love to have more of a conversation about what that means to you, to be a health equity Avenger. So I would say, you know, trying to get to a definition, even in the places where we live or in the communities that we're working, to get to a definition of what racism, inequality, and health equity means is a good place to start. Because if you are all talking something different, then it's very hard to agree on the approaches and to adopt them and embrace them. So that is also incredibly important. With that said, our work is just beginning. These 2 days are just a start. BJ says we tend to measure the lag measure and determine that something did not happen, but we forget to measure the lead measures. For example, you know, student achievement by test scores, or, you know, what does it, it comes back to that same question. How do you define opportunity? How do you define equity? How do you define a value-based approach to the work that we do? And how do we confront some of these experiences and biases and opportunities? I'm going to close with this. Very early on, I went to a workplace and I said, oh, we're going to, you know, I came out of child welfare and I said, if we only took a look at the policies and fixed the way those policies were drafted, and because policies perpetuate inequities, could have a kitchen cabinet, examine the policies, and 15 years later, that organization is still on an equity journey. And that begins to tell you how important it is and how evolutionary it is. You're not going to flip a switch and get there. And it's a long and deep conversation. So thank you for the opportunity for Chris and I to share a little bit of our thoughts, and hopefully this will provide the context for all of our deliberations over the next 2 days to be anchored in this very important conversation about equity and social justice. So I'll
Thanks, Chris.
Daniel.
I appreciate the opportunity to at least raise the topic here, and as importantly that we continue to do that in our work and our sessions going forward. And it's so gratifying to see that sort of commensurate response by the administration. And as I said, specifically reading the executive order, I think there was a real interest from at least what I've been reading from it in different sections, that there's an interest in identifying what does that mean? You know, how do we measure? What are the data elements? Are there data elements? What should that look like? And bringing together the forces and the people that need to sort of think about that in the task force work group over this year should be an exciting sort of leadership opportunity for all of us to understand, so we don't have to create those metrics ourselves, and that we can actually learn together in some kind of community of networks. So with that, this conversation can obviously continue for a long time. I encourage all of us to bring it into the ensuing conversations, to raise it and to try to embed it in the conversations we're having. And certainly as this is the beginning of it in many ways. So I want to thank you for that. And as we go forward, paying attention to that as we go forward here. So, one of the challenges of doing a virtual conference is just not, we can see faces on the screen, but there's, sort of that usual sort of like shift of, okay, next speakers come out up on the stage and speak, and everybody takes a breath. But we're going to move right in now to a session, Dr. McCoy and Brian Hanspicker. And I just want to make sure they're all there and ready to go. Let me just move the slides ahead.
Daniel, this is Christine. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great.
Yes, yeah, it's great, Christine. Wonderful.
This is Brian.
Thank you, Brian. Great to see you guys. It's always good to see you. It's great. Haven't gone out for coffee or anything yet. That's good. Loving that. So this is entitled Shovel Ready, which was Karen Smith's really implorement, if there's such a word, when we started this, which was, damn it, let's do something. So, I borrowed this phrase from many other places, but shovel ready is really kind of what we've kept front and center. And this session should give us the context for how to do that. And so Dr. McCoy leads the Visiting Nurse Association in New Jersey and is the co-principal investigator of the Integrated Care for Kids, which we'll hear a little bit more about, and is just manages a whole plethora of different programs in and around New Jersey. It's a great honor and privilege, and really wonderful to work with you, Christine. Brian has a long and documented past of working in interoperability and information sharing, and is working within Practical Markets, this company, and also is part of our Project Unify team. And he'll be adding some comments as we go forward on that. So the agenda, what we have here, I'm just going to say a few words and then hand it over to Christine. So what's the strategic imperative really for cross-domain information sharing? And there's a couple of points we want to make here. One is the NAA participants identified data sharing and integration as really one of the critical action recommendations. So much of the work we're doing really comes down to being able to exchange information, and that really surfaced as an important topic. she'll provide an overview of the New Jersey Integrated Care for Kids as a real model for cross-domain information sharing. And then we'll do a quick preview of Project Unify demonstration project. And there'll be more of those details as we go forward. So, and then talk about some specific concrete steps that are going to come out of this. I'm just going to say one thing here, which is, oops, there we go. Got to get the, this image is really in many ways that embodies the proof of concept and the work we've been doing within the Inc. Within the Project Unify. And this actually got developed by the participants of Project Unify as they were trying to put, as we were trying to put our arms around what it is we're trying to address and the complexity of the issues as you're looking at an individual or a family or a community, and how to really think about the cross-domain opportunities and needs serving one particular multi-systemic involved family. And the graphic is really a nice way to be able to describe the various systems. And this is not meant to be comprehensive or completely inclusive, but just seeing here between judicial and education and housing and human services and health, you know, many programs, many interaction points to serve one individual family. So coordination and understanding how and what and the ways of being able to share information is critically important. And so that really forms the basis of how we're thinking about it from a strategic perspective. And here is why we need data sharing. And so with that, Christine, let me turn it over to you, and we'll go from here.
Great, thank you, Daniel. So for those of you who've been on this journey with us for the last 6 months, I want to thank you for listening to our story of New Jersey Integrated Care for Kids. And for those of you who are just joining us today, I want to welcome you in to our project. Because as Uma was just saying, you know, we have pilots and then they end. And, you know, our real hope is that this project, which is of course yet another pilot, doesn't end, and that it really becomes so indispensable to the communities that we're serving, that it grows from being a 2-county pilot in New Jersey to at least being a New Jersey-wide system of care, and hopefully beyond that. And I certainly welcome anyone and everyone's input, because this is hard work, and we can use all of the help that we can get. So as Daniel showed you, we've we have these different domains, and which we'll talk about how we got to those in a moment. But really, our intent as we look forward with kids in New Jersey is to see them as a whole person in the context of their family and their households, which may go beyond direct family members, and thus the 2+ generation orientation, to intervene as far upstream as possible, and to do as much prevention as possible. And when we haven't been able to do that, to again, taking that whole person and family household orientation, realize where we may have redundancies in services, but where there also are gaps, and to jump in there and fill those gaps as efficiently and effectively as possible. So if we go to the next slide, we, as you see, this is the recommendation around data and information sharing, and it really talks to the different domains again that you saw there in the Ferris wheel, as some have called it. And importantly, that we want to have a replicable model and a really flexible approach to this, so that it can be adapted and used wherever it needs to be used. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide. Here's the summary of all of the recommendations of the National Action Agenda. And while we kind of called out data and information sharing here, each one of these is really relevant to this New Jersey project that we're going to talk about. Clearly housing is so fundamental, not just in existing, which is certainly a certain place to start, but also in the quality of housing. Having access and understanding of the civil justice system, having care coordination that is truly coordinated, because often we have a lot of uncoordinated and siloed care coordination, having a governance model to allow us to share this information across sectors, which a lot of people get very worried about, but which can be done responsibly. And of course, building this upon the experiences of those who have needed these types of supports throughout their life and can help us to design them in the most functional fashion. So back to our Ferris wheel here, you see the community or the individual family in the middle, and then you see some of these domains of housing and health, et cetera, that we've talked about, and examples in the green and pink of different parts of the system that may need to be coordinated and integrated in order to serve them. Next slide. So I think we're going to introduce you now to the Thompson family. For those of you who've been with us for a few months, you're very familiar with the Thompson family. But the Thompson family is a tool to allow us to think about the types of family that we are serving. As you can see, this is a family that has 2 children, Madison, a 3-year-old, and Jameson, a 10-year-old. Their mother, Sarah, their grandmother, Ruth, who they are currently living with, and their father, John, who's divorced from their mother, and currently not living with the family. So there's a lot of detail on this slide, and depending on the size of your screen, you may or may not be able to see it. But the point here is that we have a lot of challenges stemming from poverty in this family. John was discharged from the military and is not supporting his family. His wife had some health issues that led to her becoming opioid dependent, which is a problem. She's moved in with the kids into her mother's home, which is subsidized and not set up for all of them. And needless to say, this has been very, very disruptive to these kids, particularly Jameson, who's in school and really challenged by the change in school and not doing well there. And then our young Madison, who is not in preschool, having some health issues, probably has asthma, some other things going on with her. So we use the Thompson family really to frame all of the different types of services and supports that could be emblematic of the challenges that face so many families in New Jersey and around the country. Next slide. And so the work that we've been doing over the last 6 months is to, with Project Unify, as Brian will describe later, is really to help us work through how do we connect all of these systems. And so piece by piece, bit by bit, that's exactly what Brian and his colleagues have been working on and showing us along the way different aspects of the work that they've been able to do so that these systems don't have to be siloed and that we really can provide a comprehensive system to the Thompson family. Next slide. So to give you a little idea of the context in which we are implementing this work, let me tell you about integrated care for kids. If we can go to the next slide. This is a 7-year cooperative agreement from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Innovation. It's really the first time that they've put out something like this specifically for children. There's been a lot of work around adult care, and particularly people who are high utilizers of care, but not a lot of work in the world of kids. And what is so different about it is, although it's coming from CMMI and it's coming from health, the main outcome that they want us to achieve is preventing children from being placed outside of the home. And so, you know, most of children being placed outside of the home is not long-term hospitalization. It could be a psychiatric hospitalization. It could be a medical hospitalization. But typically when children get placed outside of the home, that's because they are in foster care, they are in juvenile detention, et cetera. So we're really looking much more broadly at the outcomes of children. And in order to do that, we have to have really broad cooperation across quite a number of domains, which you saw represented in the Ferris wheel. We are one of 8 communities that are doing this work. There are 6 other states. There are 2 projects in Illinois that we're working with around the country to try to come up with different models to do this work. Next slide. Specifically for New Jersey, for those of you familiar, we will be implementing this in Monmouth and Ocean counties using Middlesex and Burlington as comparison sites. These are pretty well-resourced counties, and that was on purpose. I do a lot of work in Newark, New Jersey, and we didn't really want to try to do this project in Newark. We're trying to do it where we actually have a lot of resources to coordinate. And I think also importantly, we're not trying to save any money. We're just trying to spend it more wisely and get people the right services at the right time. Next slide. The children are the sort of key beginning to this project is every single child getting an enhanced screening, possibly in the context of their well child visit, but also done in the community at family success centers, YMCAs, Boys and Girls Clubs, childcare centers, schools, etc. And these screenings will look not just at child development, but also at adverse childhood experiences and at the social determinants of health of the child and their family. And I see Sherry's asking about our trauma screener. We are using the PEARLS screener that California has also adopted. And to help make this happen, we do have an enhanced payment to the medical providers to help give them the extra time to get this screener done. What happens after screening? These kids get given a score of health complexity that is based on their medical complexity, a score that comes from their claims data by a very nice algorithm that's been previously used in multiple places around the country. And then we gather their social complexity data from that screening tool and together come up with their health complexity. Most kids are going to be in tier 1. But there are going to have some things that show up in this screening, and that is really going to be the responsibility of their primary care providers to be able to address those by reaching out more broadly to community resources. And we will give those primary care providers the tools to better understand how to connect to the community. And then for those kids who are moving towards risk of being placed outside of the home in tier 1 and tier 3, we will offer them the opportunity to enroll in an advanced care management plan where we will be personally helping them to have the services that they need. And that will be driven by somebody called a service integration coordinator, who's really going to be that high level person looking to see what services they're already getting, where those gaps are, and making sure that everything gets coordinated and the gaps get filled, as previously said. So we have a lot of kids. We now have 140,000 kids on Medicaid. That's grown by about 20,000 during COVID. So this is a lot of kids that we've got to get these services out to. And so again, we don't want to reinvent anything that's already there. We want to coordinate it better. But when we do need to provide new services, there will be an alternative payment model based on the savings from these kids not utilizing the ER and the hospitals inappropriately. And that will fund advanced care management teams that will be made up of a social worker, community health workers, a family support specialist, which is someone trained by our local family support organization in benefits, et cetera, and also a child life specialist. Next slide. These are the domains that you saw in the Ferris wheel, but as laid out by CMMI. So we are required to work with those on the left, and they recommend that we work with those on the right. And you can see this cuts across pretty much anywhere and everywhere that kids spend their time and who they interact with. Next slide. This is an example of, how we expect kids to be connected. There's a series of these that show the current state, and this is sort of the future state where a child would potentially be well connected. And it's not just the connection of that child, it's the connection between everyone. And that is really what is not happening now, is that we live in silos. And my own organization runs 25 programs, and those 25 programs were very, very siloed 5 years ago. And we have worked very, very hard to make connections between those programs. Next slide. So what are we going to be tracking? Again, this is laid out for us by CMMI. And so all 8 programs around the country will be doing this. We will be looking at healthcare utilization, and we will be looking at kids who need mental health services, which is called Perform Care in New Jersey, and also kids who are actively in care management for behavioral health, which is the CMO services there. And then also looking at some standard HEDIS measures, which you see there with the care quality. Next slide. And in addition, looking, all of the projects will be looking at housing security, food insecurity, and measures of educational attainment, as well as kindergarten readiness and school absenteeism as well. How are we going to get this done? We've got to braid and blend some funding together. It is going to be a big challenge, as you can imagine. Just getting the word out to families that when you come into the doctor's office or when you go to preschool or to the Boys and Girls Club, you might get asked a heck of a lot of questions, and why those questions are being asked and who will have access to that data. You know, it's really important because the communication around this, as we've seen with the COVID vaccine, for example, is its success completely depends upon people expecting and understanding why we're asking them these questions, because they could seem very invasive and very out of context otherwise. So I'm trying to do a lot of work into preparing the community for this new level of service. Trying to get primary care doctors who already feel overwhelmed to do more is also a challenge. And then of course we have the giant project that we'll be talking about a lot tomorrow of getting everybody to agree that the privacy laws can be followed and this information really can be shared. Next slide. And to hand it over to Brian here, again, you know, this is the programs that need to be included. And so this was another one of our families that we've talked about, and I'm going to let Brian walk you through some of the work that has been done to really help us be able to bring the information together from these different disciplines that we've talked about to be able to help families like the Thompsons.
Thank you, Dr. McCoy. As you note here on the slide, the proof of concept that we're developing in Project Unify is modeled on the INC program that Christina has just described, with the intent of being able to integrate and provide interoperability between Medicaid services, healthcare, behavioral health, child welfare, child protective services, education, food insecurity, housing insecurity, the courts, criminal justice, homelessness in some cases. And the real challenge is that while we can take a person-centered design approach to looking at what the needs are of the humans involved, that to exchange the information needed to support these individuals and families and the community as a whole involves dealing with information domains that have either their own domain-specific standards for the data involved, standards for how the information should be exchanged, or in some cases, like most of human services, have no standards yet defined. So the technical challenge, while we can do almost anything with sufficient time and money and developers, the technical challenge is being able to identify what information needs to be exchanged and what standards to either use or define in order to make sure that we can share this information between all of these different services, systems, and information domains. Next slide. So the first approach that we're taking in terms of next steps for the proof of concept is to tackle the tactical requirements. What are the business requirements, the technology requirements for instance, New Jersey's Integrated Care for Kids program, which of course, as with any city, region, or state, has a very complex civic structure and lots of different organizations, community-based organizations, agencies, town and city organizations, school districts, all of whom need to be engaged and cooperate together to be able to share the information we need in order to meet the goals of integrated care for kids. And from those business and technology requirements to create a roadmap to guide the data strategies and the IT investments required. And that would include mobile screening apps, mobile patient activation and engagement apps, and of course, the ability to collect a broad amount of information from a broad number of different organizations into a single common 360-degree view of individuals, families, community population, and make use of that information from a data warehouse through an integrated case management tool. So next slide. Now, in doing so, we're looking to leverage integration with the New Jersey 211 organization using a set of standards called Open Referral that will help identify what services, human services, are available within a particular community to meet specific requirements, and explore the access to civil courts through the proof of concept by enabling automated information exchange between the courts and higher risk clients, patients, to help resolve issues in their family lives, and for that matter, in their healthcare lives, their well-being lives. Engage community health lawyers and family success centers to increase awareness and access to civil courts on the part of these families and individuals involved in the system. And address the longer term systems challenges, in particular, leveraging the PPACA 9010 funding opportunities to support data interoperability statewide with federal investment. And this will be used to help overcome some of the hurdles to local funding and local authorization. Next slide. And jump in here, Christine, if you wish to correct anything I've said or take over. So in fact, I probably should turn it back to you at this point, since much of the discussion work is specific to your program.
Well, I just wanted to respond to at least one of the questions that I saw, which was asking about whether the child was the entry point for this. And the answer is yes. The child is definitely the entry point, but certainly there's very little we can do for a child without exploring them in the context of their family. And it is one of the technical challenges that we are continuing to work on with Project Unify, is that, you know, we open a child record because the child is our sort of index person, and then but we are doing a multi-generational screen, and so then we have you know, the challenge of doing care coordination across multiple generations. How do we set up the record for those other family and household members, and how do we link everything together across them? But we certainly won't be handed data by Medicaid on anybody other than the child, and that is our starting point.
So this is the penultimate slide, the discussion slide. So we are close to the end here. I yield to you, Daniel. You were about to speak up.
Yeah, I was just gonna say we've got about 10 minutes before our break and before the breakouts we'll go into. So now is a great time. And I guess I would ask one question. There's a lot of questions coming through the chat, or a lot of statements as well. And one thing is, if people have examples of organizations or jurisdictions doing this work well, by all means, please enlighten us. It has been one of the driving forces and one of the driving factors behind this work is and has been, because we haven't seen enough of that. We haven't seen replicable models. And I think that the thing to reinforce here is part of the focus on Inc. and New Jersey is, yes, to help create solutions that work for New Jersey, but to create them in a way that other jurisdictions could benefit from them, right? So it'd be one thing, and Christine, you can even reference the original RFP you put out, which was, trying to find vendors or organizations that really have the experience and the knowledge to work across domains, just technically, no less, addressing the inequality and the issues of people with lived experience and all those kinds of things that we know we want to bring into it. And so we have not found, except for a few locations, places that are actually able to do that or have done that. And so the basis is, can we create the tools and the models to be able to do that and make them as accessible in as open source way as possible? And so that's one question I'd like to say.
And so both digital and analog data sharing are of interest, because of course the first step is simply getting people to share information. It may not be in the form of electronic data, and so there's the legal component as well. So there's really the two pieces that are equally important. So we're very interested in others around the country who have done this type of work, working across domains where people understand what is and isn't relevant information, what the ground rules are for sharing that information, who should or shouldn't be in the room when certain things are talked about. And then of course, the technological component as well. As Daniel mentioned, we did, my organization itself, before the Integrated Care for Kids project, put out an RFP 2 years ago, asking for people to respond to help us bridge our public health programs. These are programs like maternal child health home visitation, WIC, early intervention, special child health services, et cetera. And the responses largely came, from EMR and HIE companies who really couldn't think beyond labs and x-rays, which are the least of our concerns in this work that we're doing. So there really wasn't somebody with a model ready to deliver to us at that point in time. But for those of you familiar with the San Diego Community Information Exchange, that's certainly a project that we've followed with a lot of interest because of their growing success in really sharing a lot of information from different sectors. But we're curious if there are other projects like that people are aware of and would like to share. Or if you tried to do it and it didn't work, why not?
Right. In ways that it can be improved. One of the things about, sort of the go-to jurisdictions that we often refer to is the fact that they take a long time. San Diego's been at it for 15 years. Allegheny's been at it for as long, if not longer. Part of the question is, and they've had sustained leadership there, although it's now changed in Allegheny. You've had sustained leadership over a long, long period of time. The question that we keep asking is, can you expedite that? Is there a way to accelerate that effort? And so that jurisdictions are not starting from, the goal line, basically. And then can you move up the field a bit more and really work from a playbook or from a set of designs and efforts? And I welcome that thinking. I know there's folks on the call here who have been deeply involved in doing that kind of work. And Carrie, you guys have been so great at sharing all of the wonderful stuff you've done in San Diego. And so appreciate that work, and any words of wisdom that you'd want to share certainly would be welcome the few minutes we have. And others, by all means.
I think there was a question for us about kind of what our starting place is.
Yeah.
So because this is a Medicaid project, our starting place is the Medicaid claims data. And then the expectation that we will do this enhanced screening for every single one of those 140,000 kids. And that might take a little while, needless to say. But so once we have the combination of the two, the claims data on the screening, that we will generate this this health complexity score, and the score is what will send us on our journey, either the primary care provider or the integrated care for kids team.
Absolutely.
Dr. McCoy,
Mhm.
could you say something about what it's like to build, partnerships across sectors through the Integrated Care for Kids program? You're funded by CMS. What would be kind of an ideal scenario which you think, which might, kind of aid in getting the partnerships in place, either from like a cross government agency,
Yeah.
that kind of
Thanks,
model?
Matt. I think you hit on a really good point. There's a lot of projects like this. Another one that I work on is called Promise Neighborhoods, that's funded out of Department of Education. And I think, the problem with each one of these is that when they're funded by a single sort of, federal agency coming through its state agency of the same name, is that you've got the buy-in from that group of people, and then they have to try to talk everybody else into playing. And as opposed to having something that really, the genesis of it is across multiple departments. I know when I used to work at HHS, we worked very closely with the Department of Education, and we would put things out together. We worked very closely with the Department of Agriculture. Think about the dietary guidelines for Americans. So they were joint projects of multiple federal departments. And, that really is so much more successful. At the local level, people have been really excited about this for the last year, because everybody knows that they're locked up in their silo. Everybody knows that there's information they want to have from other people, but the time it takes to convince people that they can release that information to them is so burdensome that they typically just learn to live without it. So they have really been coming to the table regularly. I hope we'll continue to do so. The proof is in the pudding a little bit this week when we asked them to vote on a data governance structure and agree about how we're going to move forward, and then start sitting down with each one of these organizations to sign the data use agreements. And that's where we'll really find out where things stand. But certainly the actual service providers at the local level and county human services officials, very, very excited about this work.
I want to add a point as well, and feel free in the remaining minutes for folks who want to join, jump into the conversation. The chat is wonderful, and there's great resources coming through here. I want to point out that this last week there was I think it was last week, there was a letter put out by CMS's leadership around Medicaid and their view of social determinants. It was a very extensive letter, as they typically are, but it reiterates, and I think for those of you who are sort of deeply into the Medicaid world, it really reiterates and deepens the recognition of social factors in health and well-being. And I thought, especially it was right before the inauguration, the fact that it was actually published along with one from the Administration for Children and Families on a related topic was a very strong positive sign that really explains and I think expands the view of what Medicaid will be at least willing to consider as part of the 1115 waivers and as part of their normal operations. And if you want to make any comments on that, that would be super as well. Hear about that. Okay, well, that letter is, as you will notice, is in the NIC resources. So you can find it. You can certainly just Google it. but it's there and easily accessible as well. And we'll put that link in here for those folks who are new to that.
So Daniel, if I'd make just one
please.
comment.
Oh, go ahead.
I noticed one of the resources that folks posted in the chat was Unite Us, and I wanted to point out that North Carolina is one of the other Inc. projects, and of course working very, very closely with Unite Us. So we'll be able to see the exciting stuff they come up with.
Right. I don't know if there's anyone from North Carolina on the call with us today, but that would be interesting. They've been on the journey for a long time. So how they've been able to make progress, as well as some of the other states, is really super important. To your point, Eric, and I think you probably read these things as closely as anybody. What I thought was interesting was that it did reiterate some of the key ideas, and in particular, 90 on the data technology and interoperability work. It reiterated the 90-10 match for connecting services that benefit, really connect services outside of Medicaid, which I think is important. I don't know how much that has actually been taken advantage of by states over the years, but the fact that it's still there, it's still available, it's a funding source to actually do that kind of connection means that there's a funding source to be able to at least build the infrastructure or parts of the infrastructure,
Right.
which states would really appreciate.
And that's really critical. I mean, in New Jersey, our state has been very loath to use that funding source. They've, only thought that they could use it to connect things like the immunization registry. So I think this language will really help us to move forward.
Indeed.
I think this is Adam. I think there's also a bully pulpit element to all of this. When we see all of the different guidances and comments coming out of the administration in its early days, it's about social determinants, it's about children, it's about interoperability. I think that sending those messages early, even if they are reiterating past knowledge, means something. We've heard the bully pulpit used in different ways over the last few years. This is a different one, and racial equity. I mean, these are loud messages coming out early on, even if they are duplicative.
And let me just say one last thing. Matt asked about, do this or do that. And I just want to note that doing this work in COVID has been very, very interesting. We were funded right at the very end of December of 19. And so just as we were getting organized, it became very, very challenging to engage people at the highest levels of government here in New Jersey. So we have taken his number 2 approach, which is get everything, all of our ducks lined up, get our governance structure, everything in place, engage people at the local level, and then bring all of this back up to the commissioners, et cetera. We had met with them prior to being funded and told them we were hoping this was coming our way, but now we've got to circle back and try to find 5 minutes in their very busy schedules as they continue to battle with the pandemic.
Thanks, Christine. Thanks, Brian. We'll be hearing more from you as we go forward over the next couple of days. But thanks for that introduction. I hope you can see why and how integrated care for kids in New Jersey in particular really presents an opportunity to actually go demonstrate this work. And their leadership there is super for others to learn from and to be able to expedite the process. So we're gonna take a bit of a break. By all means, stand up. Do whatever you need to do for 10 minutes or so, 10, 12 minutes. Come back, and when we start up at 1:45, we'll just leave the Zoom on so you don't have to do anything. We'll come back into this main room, and then you'll have a choice of 3 breakouts. One is the Let's Get Technical, that will take a deeper dive into the Project Unify and data integration. And there's a number of members from the Unify team will be on there and others. So that's the first one. The other one is courting equity using technology to improve access to civil justice. So this is again a deeper dive into the civil justice world and what we've been learning there, and have a number of really interesting presenters and discussions around civil justice. And then finally, from research to reality, what we know and don't know about social determinants, and David Rekoff and Karen Smith and PG Forrest will also be conducting that conversation along going into a deeper dive. So with that, please come back. And what we'll do is, it's a little tricky, everyone will be in the room. We will open up the breakout rooms and then you will move yourself, or we will help you move to the breakout room. And once we get situated, our presenters will take off with their presentations. At the end of it, you'll get some timing notifications, and then we'll come back for the final closing session later. Okay, so with that, take 10. See you all in just a brief moment or so. So what we're going to do here is, as I said, we're going to, Michael, when you tell me you're ready, we're going to move people, and then there'll be a little bit of moving chairs. You'll just hopefully just see a join next to the group you want to join, and we'll be helping out, making sure people are in rooms. If you don't go anywhere and you stay in the main room, just be aware of which group you want to go to, and I'll just briefly mention that again. There's the 3 of them. There's the Let's Get Technical, deeper dive into Project Unify. There's Courting Equity, which is about civil justice. And then there's the Research to Reality, which is more about social determinants. So just be aware of which group you want to go to. Those labels should be on the site when you go to it. And with that, Michael, if you're ready, let's give this a grand experiment, a run for money there.
And away we go. I was talking there, but I was muted. Okay.
I don't see a choice here.
Oh, you should have been whisked away, Adam.
I'm not whisked.
Oh, you're not one of the moderators. I mean, the liaisons today, are you?
No, I'm not. I'm moderating the panel.
Yeah. Okay. You're not seeing the usual.
No, sir.
Menu?
Let me see if I can find another way in.
You go to the 3 dots.
Yeah, I'm going to go to the breakout rooms. I just see a listing of unassigned.
Yeah. So do you see a little dot that says join?
Oh, no is the answer. I've done this before. But it's not the menu I'm being given.
I don't see a join either. This is Lisa.
No,
Yeah.
I'm getting the host menu of people who have not joined, and the menu I get is to enable me to assign them.
Keep scrolling down, because under that are the various rooms.
Got it.
Yeah, but that still doesn't solve the problem for people who are still unjoined.
Yeah, I'm using the iPad app and there does not appear to be anything about joining.
Christine?
Oh, wait. Oh, you know what? It's over in the left hand. There's 4 little squares. Okay, there it is.
Okay, there's a bunch of people who are not joined. Are they in the main room?
Yeah. For anyone who heard what Christine had to say, the icon is usually 4 little squares. So if you click on that, perhaps you'll see the options for breakout rooms.
I see that, and I clicked on the one I'm trying to go to, but nothing seems to be happening.
Which one do you want to go to?
Let's Get Technical.
And this was, who's speaking?
This is Carl Treeleven.
Okay, so I think we're going to need to move people.
Yeah. Maybe take one more scan around your screen for the breakout rooms icon. See if anything pops up.
Same thing's happening to me. I see the breakout rooms, 4 squares, click on it, clicking on Let's Get Technical, and it's not, hold on, let me try one more time.
It should show you a join.
Click on the number,
up at the top.
and that'll do it. Yeah.
Yeah, if you hover over the number.
Yeah, that's what it is.
That's right. Grace's tip was to hover over the number, and that sometimes reveals the join command. So, you know, we still have a good number here.
Yeah, I'm not seeing
So-
where the icon is on the screen. The 4.
Top left, perhaps.
Bottom
sometimes-
right for me.
Yeah, some people have the menu along the, it just depends on your browser, I guess. The menu can be right be at the top.
You want to be able to kind of check mark. And I'm saying this is one of them that we're going deep on.
Would it be possible to move me to the courting equity group?
Yeah. Sorry, who was that?
Lisa Rieger.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
Let's just go through that quickly then.
Yeah.
You want to
This is-
just go through?
Yeah, this is Carrie Riccatelli. Can you put me in the research to reality?
Yep. CJ, Carrie.
Carrie, what about CJ? Carrie Wagoner?
The research to reality, please.
Thanks.
All right.
This is Vernon. I'm stuck too as well. So research.
Where do you want to go, Vernon?
Research to reality.
Okay.
There's a way.
Okay, I just sent them off there. Trista.
TV.
Trista,
Let's get technical.
I'm Casanova.
Yep, let's get technical, thanks.
Yep. Oh yeah, chat. Yeah, the chat room. Sorry, chat works as well. I'll look at that, Daniel.
Yeah, put people in. Yeah, if you want to put your name in there. TB wants to move to research.
Ken Kaplan wants to move to research.
Good stuff. Let's get technical. Whoops. Dang it.
Keep going. If you're not in a group, put it in the chat. Kay was at.
Okay.
Kay was at Ken Salyard or Kristen? Kristen.
There's Kristen is at the top.
Reporting equity. Kristen. Who else?
Nancy Connolly,
Research, please.
got you.
Thank you.
Laura?
Paul Nelson, I got you, Paul. All right. Kenneth? All right.
Ken Salyard, are you there?
Nope.
Paul Embley?
Anyone else?
Can you put me, Dimple Sareka, into the research to reality, please?
Yep, got you.
Thank you.
More? Christine Tappan?
DJ research. I got it.
All other folks still outstanding. Jennifer? Chris Tappan? Whoever else was speaking?
Hi, this is Kirsten Alvarez-Fiedler. Could you please move me to courting equity? I think I still am.
Courting equity, gotcha.
Sonori?
Yeah, I guess I'm courting equity.
Got you. Christine Tappan? Or Kenneth? L?
The others may not be back. Anyone else?
Ella Gemma? Ella?
Hi there. Yeah, I'd love to be in the deeper dive.
That was Ella or Jennifer?
Ellie Gemma.
Okay. So we just have Christine and Jennifer Hall.
And Ken Salyer. Ken, are you back with us?
Ken, you're muted in case you didn't know. I'll send him a direct message.
I can unmute, I think. Oh, no, I can't.
You can ask him to unmute, but you can't force him to unmute.
Yep.
Not bad. Managed
Hey.
to get everyone.